latest criteria, advanced lines of treatment in depth. What's new in medical management? Is there anything new in surgical management? What about developments in ART? So, first of all, let's learn the basics. When we think of PCOS, it is one condition where people always like to agree to disagree. Over the years, these agreements have continued, we all know that, and the criteria for diagnosis and management keep on changing, keeping us in a big fix. Now, we do have latest international guidelines 2018, and this was basically by ISHRE and ASRM, released in July 2018 during ISHRE conference at Barcelona. Now there are so many, nearly about 18 organizations which were associated in bringing these beautiful guidelines, and the most prestigious organization of PCOS, the Androgen Access and Polycystic Ovary Syndrome Society, and our British Fertility Society, Aspire, our very own PSOS Society of India, for which I am one of the managing committee member, the Royal College of OBGY, and our own POXI. Now, very nicely, we should also know not only the guidelines for our infertility management, but also we should know the PCOS criteria for diagnosis, the latest guidelines. So, according to this 2018 guidelines, they say we should include two of the following three criteria, that is chronic anovulation, hyperandrogenism, both clinical or biological, and polycystic ovaries. So, in addition to this, it's stated, in addition to these clinical findings, the levels of 17 hydroxyprogesterone and AMH, should be considered. Now, when we go to the infertility management, very simple lines of treatment has been made, and this is the first line, second line, and the third line. In the first line, non-pharmacological management of infertility, that is lifestyle modifications. The first line of pharmacological management is letrozole, clomifene plus metformin and metformin, and then gonadotropin. The second line of pharmacological or surgical management is gonadotropins and also the laparoscopic ovarian surgery. Now, the third line of management could be other appropriate interventions, including IVF. So now, coming to the management, we take up on the lifestyle interventions, or so they are most important management as far as PCOS is concerned. I always tell my patients that please have these management protocols, the lifestyle interventions, till you die. You may tell till you live. That's a better option. So what are these? Can be divided into 4 different subgroups. One is the behavioral strategies, dietary intervention, exercise, and weight assessment we have to do regularly. Now, lifestyle modification, as I told you, is very important, and it consists of the proper diet, balanced food, nutrition, exercise, everything together. Now, effectiveness of lifestyle intervention, we have to do a lot of counseling for these patients. Especially the emphasis has to be done on diet, the hypocaloric diet, which is very difficult for these patients because they've been used to having a higher calorie diet without their knowledge. And when you ask them, they'll always say, we just eat one roti in the morning and one roti in the evening, but it's not possible to gain so much of weight, and so much of BMI is increased. And then exercise has to be long term. That should be our aim. And then at least 5 to 10% of the body weight has to reduce if they want to, conceive. and they should avoid alcohol and smoking. If necessary, you could also refer them to proper professional to assist them in nutrition and also exercise. Now, we can also call it as a smart strategy. That means specific, measurable, achievable, realistic. So we have to put a goal and also tell them to do the self monitoring. And in these PCOS patients, anxiety and depression is very common. Psychological problems are many, and so we can also, you know, refer them to a psychiatrist or a counselor, etc. And all the patient interactions should be patient centered. And very important point here is we have to value women's individualized healthy style preferences. It may be different for different people. Some may be non-vegetarian, some may be vegetarian, some may not like to go out for exercising. So many things are there, cultural, socioeconomic and ethnic differences we have to keep in mind. Now, weight reduction, the at least BMI of 30 or more must lose weight, yeah, infertile PCOS women to conceive. And just weight reduction may really be an answer to all our problems, like, ovulation is restored, and then the way they respond to the ovulation induction drugs is also very superb. And 50% of the treatment of PCOS is simply weight reduction. But that weight reduction is quite difficult to achieve, and because you have to have patience. Patient has to have patience. You have to have patience in counseling, making them do, etc. It takes a lot of energy and patience. So even if one loses 5 to 10 kg, the effect is tremendous. Now, ideal weight loss is unknown, but a 5% decrease of the total body weight might be very meaningful clinically. So, what does obesity really do? Why do you want to make the patient shed weight? Because this expresses and exaggerates all the symptoms and the of insulin resistance, especially. And most of these patients are 80% of the women who are obese are having hyperinsulinemia and insulin resistance. And also, obesity adversely affects reproduction by anovulation, pregnancy loss. These patients get gestational diabetes during pregnancy, etc. Now, what about anti-obesity agents? It should not be really offered according to the evidence, because it's still experimental therapy. So we need to take help of other things like lifestyle interventions to really achieve the goal. Now, dietary intervention, there are some eating principles. No one dietary type recommended in PCO. An energy deficit of 30% or 500 to 750 kilocalories per day. That is about, that will be a deficit for these patients of about 1,200 to 1,500 calories per day. And also, we have to consider the individual energy requirements, body weight, food preferences, and physical activity, and all has to be very properly calculated. And what again I say this, it's an individualized approach. So, what about the weight loss, which we don't want too much mild weight loss? So, it depends on the age of the patients. For adults from 18 years to 64, we have taken 64 because we are talking general for even general public how to lose weight. This is just a minimum of 150 minutes per week of moderate intensity physical activity, and seven, or if you think a little bit vigorous intensity, you can cut down the time and make it as 75 minutes per week of vigorous intensities, or an equivalent. amount of, you should also include muscle strengthening activities. I always say exercise is a combination of three things. One is the aerobic exercises, that is cardio, what we call. Then second is the muscular muscle strengthening, and third is what is known as stretching. And before starting any exercise, we have to advise the patients to do some warming exercises. Now we come to the adolescents. Adolescents can do at least 60 minutes of moderate to vigorous, with intensity, and strengthen the muscles and bone at least 3 times weekly. So all these activities to be performed at least 10 minutes or around 1000 steps, aiming to achieve at least 30 minutes daily on most of the days. So now what about moderate weight loss? 250 minutes per week of moderate intensity, and muscle strengthening. Again, here also we have muscle strengthening, etc. on nearly non-consecutive days, and in all these patients, we need to tell them to minimize the sedentary lifestyle and also screening and sitting time. Self monitoring has to be advised. Fitness tracking devices, we have so many these days, and that could really support and promote active lifestyles. Now, before we go to the other part, I want to also tell you what I do to my PCOS patients. I tell them that you choose your choice of activity. If you like to dance, you can do it at home with proper shoes. Close the door in front of a mirror. You can, then that patient will continue for a very long time this activity because she likes it. Or if some patients, if they're younger aged, you can advise them fast walking. Don't advise them to, if they're too much of overweight, you should not be advising skipping, etc., because that's not good. And once again, I told you, uh, monitoring is important. Now, what about bariatric surgery? It is also very experimental, and we have to weigh the risk to benefit ratios, and there is no evidence to really advocate this as a fertility therapy. Now we come to the next, that is the advances in the medical management. So letrozole, this should be considered first line treatment of ovulation induction, but you can think of giving others drugs also when letrozole is not available, use is not permitted, cost is prohibitive, and multiple pregnancy appears to be less with letrozole compared to clomipene. So when the BMI is more than 30, then letrozole is a better, compound compared to CC. Now, we have so many recommendations from many of the societies, and so all of them have proved beyond doubt that this is the first line of ovulation induction. That's the letrozole, and it's even the Cochrane Library, the biggest database, that supports the theory that we should give letrozole as first line. Now, what are the regimes of letrozole? We have many regimes. One is the standard method of giving, and that is for 5 days. You can either start on day 2 or day 3. Then and the dose is 2.5 milligram to 7.5 milligram per day. Now, single dose 20 milligram on day 3, and here you can see that the success rates are same as that of the standard dose, the ovulation rate and pregnancy rate. Now, we also have an extended therapy where you can give for 10 days. And this extended letrozole therapy is generally given to clomipene resistant patients. And here also we can see that similar ovulation rate, that is 66%, higher pregnancy rate 17% compared to 12%, and beneficial in clomipene citrate resistant PCOS. Now, this is the extended protocol in a schematic representation. And this is the letrozole step-up protocol. Here, what we do, it's very simple to remember. 2.5 milligram letrozole, give on day 2, 1 tablet, day 3, 2 tablets, then 3 tablets, and 4 tablets. So here I have given this protocol in many of my patients and getting very good results. So, in patients who are resistant to clomiphene, you can really add metformin, and the only problem is this multiple pregnancy with clomiphene citrate. And then in these patients, when we use metformin, we have to um, do a monitoring. Now, clomiphene citrate, I am not discussing too many things. That's why I told you a little bit of metformin inclusion. Now I'm going to tell you all about clomiphene citrate failure when pregnancy is not achieved even after 6 cycles, that is failure. And what are the causes of failure? That is peripheral anti-estrogenic effects. In that we have two subgroups. One is the cervical mucus inconsistency, it becomes thickened, and then the endometrial growth and development because of the peripheral receptor problem. Then in cases where there's a elevated LH also, there's a failure in the CC patients. So what's the treatment options when we have clomiphene citrate failure? You can use other ovulants, or we can give clomiphene with gonadotropins or just gonadotropins. Now resistance, what is it's different from failure here? The patient is anovulatory after 6 months of treatment. So what are the causes? Obese women, hyperandrogenemia, insulin resistance. Now what are the different treatment options? Extended course, that is 7 to 10 days. With this extended course, friends, maybe 50% will ovulate. And also in resistance, we could give glucocorticoids. Generally, dexamethasone is given in a low dose in the proliferative phase. Now, metformin also, where women are obese. I already told you that in patients whose LH is more, and that's the reason of clomiphene resistance, you could use oral contraceptive pills. And the other option is gonadotropins or laparoscopic ovarian drilling for these patients. Okay, so now what is the stern reality? What is really new? Metformin is there for some time. So what about myoinositol, dichloroinositol, NAC? So this is excellent metformin Cochrane review, which is quite new. And here, what they say, by giving metformin, the pregnancy rates increases, ovulation rate increases. The other benefit is fasting insulin is reduced, serum testosterone is reduced. That's why we give metformin. And then live birth rate is good, miscarriage rate is low, lipid profile is becomes lower. But there are a few minor side effects like metallic taste, gastritis, acidosis, and hepatorenal problems. Now, initially we all the gynecologists started using metformin, so that was a rise of metformin. And then came an era when people all over started grumbling about metformin, and so a fall of metformin. So, what is the real current status? I want to clarify that metformin is not indicated as a primary ovulation induction drug, and combination with clomiphene superior over clomiphene or metformin in terms of pregnancy rates. And what does metformin do? Metformin reduces the incidence of OHSS in PCOS. So, friends, I told you from a long time we are using metformin. We are using since last 2 decades. So why not think of alternatives? So what next? Now, is there anything better than metformin? Yes. there's a newer drug, myoinositol. Initially, there is a lot of hue and cry that there are no proper, it's not evidence based, not in the literature. But then lots of new papers have been there. And let us go a little bit in depth about myoinositol. It has intracellular signals essential for the development of oocyte, improves in vitro maturation of oocytes, produces second messengers for FSH and uptake of glucose. Now, these are the very common source, natural source where we have myoinositol. Actually, inositol is there in our body. That's what I used to always think. Why not give myoinositol? Anyway, it is there in our body, and initially it was used for psychological ailments. They give in a very high dose, more than 4 grams per day. But in our infertility, we just give 2 grams. So, friends, it's available in fruits, especially grapefruit, and leafy vegetables not that much. But then all the the foods containing seeds like beans, almonds, walnuts, etc., they have a high content of myoinositol. Now, what's the dose of myoinositol? It's 2 gram for ovulation induction. It's 2 gram per day. It really improves the ovulation rates. And there's a randomized double-blind placebo control trial. And here they say that the duration was 14 weeks, and it was given in the dose of 14 grams, and the folic acid was given as a placebo. Here, significantly better ovulation rate, and lipid profile also was affected. The BMI reduced. Now, the effect of inositol on PCOS, it acts both on obese and thin PCOS. This is the beauty of the drug, and the hormonal and clinical parameters get affected and changed for the good. Yeah, so this is one more, review of myoinositol, and according to many of these, evidence-based literature, it is a very good therapy, effective and well tolerated. In with metformin, as I told you, we have some side effects. Ovulation and induction and pregnancy rates are poorer in women with higher degree of insulin resistance, and combination with clomiphene citrate additionally increases the ovulation and pregnancy rate. Now, what about D-chiro-inositol? This provides second messengers for promoting uptake of glucose and synthesis of glycogen, and so if the deficiency contributes to if there is a deficiency of DI, then that means there's a insulin because of the insulin resistance. Now, what happens to the BMI? Myoinositol decreases both insulin and the BMI. Here you can see on the graph, it's nearly reducing more than half. So, missing link, I think we all feel there's some missing link in the management of PCOS as far as the infertility management is concerned, and that is the combination of MI and DI. So I want to just explain to you all why we need to give this both myoinositol and D-chiro-inositol, because there in the peripheral tissues there's a decreased epimerase, and in the ovary there's an increased epimerase, and because of the peripheral tissues having insulin resistance and decreased epimerase causes conversion of MI to DCI, and that DCI deficiency causes hyperinsulinemia, and that hyperinsulinemia will cause increased epimerase. So here it is decreased and here it is increased epimerase. So over this increased epimerase, what it will do, it will decrease the conversion of MI to DI. So there is MI deficiency. Here it is DCI, D-chiro deficiency. And so suppose that is the reason that we have to supplement both myoinositol and D-chiro-inositol so that the insulin level becomes normal, reduces the androgen level, and ultimately there's ovulation and increases the chance of fertility. Now, uh, this is nearly similar, but some more points like myoinositol acts at ovary, increases glucose cell intake, normalizes LH and FSH ratio, increases oocyte quality, reduces the amount of FSH used during IVF cycles, and improves IVF results. So, DCI acts at peripheral level, stimulates glycogen synthesis. This DCI also reduces insulin resistance and reduces hyperinsulinemia. So, there's no effect on the ovaries and reduces the risk of metabolic syndrome. So, what is the optimum dose for MI? Let's see what the evidence is. You have to remember, friends, that we just can't say that she is giving that much, that doctor is giving that much, so we will give this much of dose. We have to have the backup of evidence to give any medication. So, what's the right dose and what's the low dose, etc. So, there's a ISHRE evidence, and according to this is a very latest study where it was done in Spain. 8 centers were there, 6 regions, and Dr. Nicolas had done this study. And so, according to him, it is myoinositol 550 milligram and dichloroinositol 150 milligram. Let's only remember the right dose. So here what happens if we give the right dose of 150 dichloro, you can see here the pregnancy rates are nearly doubled up. So some of the advantages of this combination is optimal therapeutic dose of MI. In the clinical trials, myoinositol has been used at a dose of 1 to 4 gram per day. It offers more than 1 gram, which is effective in improving oocyte quality. Now, optimal dose of DCI is 300 to 600 milligrams per day, and it offers 300 milligram per day of DCI, which is effective for improving insulin resistance at periphery. Do we have Indian studies and for the PCO phenotypes? Yeah, definitely. This is a very good, literature by Bharti Kalra, Sanjay Kalra, and JB Sharma. And once again, they say that DCI 500 milligram really improved and maturation of the oocytes significantly, and also they reduced the oxidative stress. So, inositol, also they say that inositol is quite safe in pregnancy. I cannot really go into detail of all these, but definitely they have good effects on ovarian function, like melatonin improves ovarian function and quality of oocytes. N-acetylcysteine improves insulin sensitivity, and also myoinositol reduces hirsutism, acne and weight. Alpha calcidiol and chromium, once again insulin secretion is improved and the sensitivity is improved. L-methylfolate, it reduces homocysteine levels. Now we come to the gonadotropins. This is another, you can use it as a first line of pharmacological management. It also comes in the second line. So let us think, because sometimes we are using with clomipene citrate. So let us think that this is used as second line agent before, without getting a lot of confusion. This is used for women. We should not suddenly jump to gonadotropins in case of PCOS patients. We have to try with the first line, the Letrozole, clomipene, etc. And then if there's a failure, then we come to the gonadotropins. Now it could be, I told you this, a little confusion, but don't get confused, could be considered as first line treatment when cost really matters to the patient, and the potential risk of multiple pregnancies there. So to avoid all that, so we have to see the first thing with gonadotropins in our countries, it has to be affordable and available. Sometimes the villages, etc., it may not be available. I go to so many centers and I've seen that in smaller towns it's not available. And so we can also add metformin. This could be added when in cases of clomipene resistance PCOS, and either gonadotropins or laparoscopic ovarian surgery could be done in CC resistance PCOS. Now, what about the protocol or the regime of gonadotropins when we do for our PCOS patients? I think we should not remember any other protocol except chronic low dose protocol. That is the protocol for PCOS patients. And here, what does it really do? Aims to reach the threshold FSH concentration and the explosive ovarian response, which is very typical of PCOS patients, is not there. Yeah. So, what is really chronic low dose? The name itself is very clear and signifies what it is. Here, what we need to do, we need to take the lowest dose of gonadotropin. Supposing you're taking recombinant FSH, then you can take a very low dose like 25 you can start, or 50. And then if you're using HMG, you have to start with 75. You start a little late, uh, say from day 5, and then continue to give for about 10 to 12 days. When after the 10th day, that means after 5 days of gonadotropins, you have to do ultrasound every 2 to 3 days so that you don't miss. And if you find that no follicle is developed even after 12 days, then you increase the dose to 150 if you're giving HMT. Supposing you started recombinant 50, then you make it as 100. Now we come to another very interesting advances in surgical management. So laparoscopic ovarian drilling, we could do drilling either unilateral or bilateral, and it's a very beneficial treatment for PCOS women, especially in clomipene resistant PCOS. And friends, it is really as effective as gonadotropin treatment, but only problem and also the risk of multiple pregnancy, ovarian hyperstimulation, etc. does is not there, and you don't have to do intensive monitoring like in gonadotropins or clomipene citrate. And there is a quite a good responsiveness of the ovary to the to clomipene citrate, especially after the surgery. You give clomipene, and you'll see that the same patient who was not responding to clomipene is now responding. So they respond to the ovulatory drugs. Now, choice should be made on individual basis. Use of gonadotropins, multiple pregnancies, and intense monitoring. And in laparoscopic ovarian surgery, it is effective in only less than 50% of women. Additional ovulation induction is required. The mode of action, it releases androgen rich follicular fluid and decreases the androgen producing stroma, and there's a transient reduction in inhibin, and also the expression of FSH is increased, crowding of the cortex is decreased, so which allows the normal growing of the follicles to the surface, resulting in resummation of the ovulation, and appears to be as effective as routine gonadotropin therapy in the treatment of CC insensitive PCOS. Now, what about the techniques? Electrocautery performed using an insulated unipolar needle and a non-insulated distal end measuring 1 to 2 centimeters is used. The number of puncture, actually it is chosen by many by depending upon the ovarian volume. And most surgeons, what they prefer, they want to do 4 punctures per ovary, each for 4 seconds, and it's a rule of four, and delivering 640 J of energy per ovary. That is the lowest effective energy. But generally, it is clinical response is dose dependent. So what you can do, you can calculate 60 J per ml of the ovarian volume, and that also could be the adjusted thermal dose can then be given, and there's a better reproductive outcomes, and also problems of post-operative additions and all of the same as that of the 600 J per ovary. Despite lack of convincing evidence and significant reduction in operative time, still, I don't know, many of the laparoscopic surgeons do bilateral ovarian drilling rather than the unilateral drilling. This is from the literature. Now, what are the advances in laparoscopic ovarian drilling? It could be used, it could be done using a monopolar hook electrode, also done through a harmonic scalpel. This was something, struck to me because I read it. I'm not doing all this, but then I just read office micro laparoscopic ovarian drilling and transvaginal hydrolaparoscopy, that is known as fertiloscopy. And also, we can do a transvaginal sonography guided ovarian interstitial laser treatment. That is also available. We have to wait and see what will be the outcome of all these treatments. They're being researched now. Now, when I was very small in the sense in my this IVF practice, and I was called to, I think, Orissa or something, and then one of it is quite a big conference, and one I had a talk on, fortunately or unfortunately, on laparoscopic ovarian drilling. Actually, I'm not a I do endoscopic surgery, but I'm not a specialist in there. That my specialty is IVF. So some so endoscopic surgeon asked me, should we do re-drilling? Then, according to my simple mind, I said no. Then he said, no, madam, there are in the literature it says so. So I read about it, and then it's eye opener. Ovulation and pregnancy rate are 60% and 53%. Better outcomes in laparoscopic ovarian drilling sensitive than laparoscopic drilling resistant cases. That we have to remember. Concerns of additions and diminished ovarian reserve, we have to really relate to the RCTs and really address this issue. Until then, repeated application of LOD should not be encouraged. Okay, now I think the last part of my talk, advances in ART. This is my branch. So in vitro fertilizing, third line, and in the absence of any absolute indications for IVF ICSI, and where other ovulation induction therapies have failed, we could give our patients. It's very effective when elective single embryo transfer is used. Multiple pregnancies and OHSs are the most severe complications that can come, and we have to be very careful. Counseling is very important, friends, for these PCOS patients. If they don't get pregnant, that is a problem. If they get pregnant, that is a problem. So we have to tell whenever we have this IVF, the availability, cost, and convenience. The risk of OHSs has to be explained. Actually, now many centers across the world have OHSs free clinic, and in all my centers where I am attached, we have OHSs free clinics because we do antagonist protocol, and wherever there's a risk of OHSs, we do not give HCG. So that is the mantra to do a very good type of IVF practice. Now, GnRH antagonist protocol is the preferred protocol, and it reduces the duration of stimulation, total gonadotropin dose, and incidence of OHSS. HCG should be used at the lowest dose, if at all, for oocyte maturation to reduce the incidence of OHSS. What about the triggering? This has to be done by GnRH agonist, and that only you can do if you're doing with the GnRH antagonist protocol. And also, if the patient shows any minor signs of developing OHSS and where fresh embryo transfer you're not planning, then you have to trigger with GnRH agonist and then freeze the embryos and then do the embryo transfer at a later date. Now, a little bit of in vitro maturation. Somehow, this method of IVF has not been very popular. I think one of the reasons for this is the difficulty in the technique, because you have to retrieve very small the oocytes from very small follicles. But I think all said and done, I would definitely like to do this, and it really offers several advantages over the standard IVF for PCOS. Total elimination of risk of OHS is there. Also cheaper and with a lower side effect profile. And it's a very patient-friendly approach for these patients of IVF. How do we do? So the retreat, we have to stimulate the patients with a lower dose, lower gonadotropin stimulation and a short duration also, and retrieve the oocytes from follicles which are around 10 to 12 and then retrieve the oocytes, and the embryologist matures these oocytes which are either germinal vesicles or metaphase 1 stage of meiosis which are retrieved, and we mature them to M2, and then it is fertilized, and all other things are nearly same, but then we will be transferring in the next phase. So I come to the last slide of my talk, and lifestyle intervention is the first and foremost modality. Letrozole, the first line of management of pharmacological, uh, you know, types, and clomiphene and metformin having a role alone or in combination. Gonadotropins are second line, but also can be first line. Laparoscopic ovarian drilling is second line, but can be first line also. IVF third line, where other ovulation induction therapies have failed, and an IVF antagonist protocol and agonist trigger and freeze all policy to avoid OHS.